Well, welcome to the Ahern video podcast. Today we want to talk a little bit about successor planning. My firm has been involved in a lot of transition plans, and it's a very difficult process. It's a very emotional process, and it's a process that most founders of businesses dread having to go through. In fact, statistically, most of them don't. They set up their estate, they pass on, and then they let the siblings argue who's on first and who's on second. Transitioning a business is as difficult as selling the business. Transitioning a business to the next generation, whether it's your children, your nephews, your nieces, or whatever, is a very difficult process, but it's a process that all business owners have to look at some point in their career. I've consistently said that when you begin a business, you should plan your exit strategy. Most of us don't. You assume that if you're a family operation, you assume that the children are going to follow in the mother or father's footsteps. But in many cases, that doesn't happen. I have 5 children. 3 of them were in the business, none are in the business. All my children were in the business when they were little, learning the business to earn some extra money. 2 of them came into it full-time, and they didn't like it. They said it's too hard. It takes too long. And it's a process that they just couldn't embrace. It doesn't mean that they weren't good kids. It simply means that they weren't ready it was not the career path that they wanted to choose. When you have multiple children in a business, if you want to pass the business on to the children, the first thing you have to do is have a plan. When do you plan on exit the business? How do you plan on exiting the business? What type of steps do you take to exit the business? And who do you choose to be the founder? Many times I receive telephone calls from a husband and wife, and they say, we're planning on giving the business to our children. We have 5 children in the business. Well, who's going to be the leader? They're all going to have equal stock. That's not what I asked. Who's going to be the leader? Who's going to be the one person responsible for making the final decision? 9 out of 10 times the parents don't want to make that decision. They'll say, well, they'll do it by committee. Here's the problem. It doesn't work. I think the committee attitude should be embraced in businesses. I think committees can help businesses grow in certain circumstances, but there comes a point in time where one person has to make the difficult decision, even though it may not be the popular decision. So if you're deciding to exit the business, if you're deciding to transfer the business to your children, the first thing you have to do is not look at your children as your children, but look at them as employees. Who's the most responsible? Who handles the money the best? Who does the most research? Who's always the first one in the office and the last one to leave? Who enjoys and embraces the business? Who's the one that can deal with the difficult situations in the most stress-free environment? Who is the one that has the ability not to lose their temper, but to recognize there are always 2 sides to every story and try to find a middle ground when challenges occur? Who's the one that's always thinking outside the box? Who's the one that really cares? Being a father of 5 children, I can tell you that I deeply love all of my children, but each of them have different values. Some of them have all consistent values, but in my particular case, if I was to choose one leader in my business, it probably would not have been the boys. It would have been my daughter. Why? Because she embraced the values that I embraced. She was very conservative with money. She always paid attention to details. She was always concerned about other people's feelings. And that gets me to the next point. If you have multiple children in the business, do not choose because of gender. Gender has nothing to do with, should have nothing to do with your decision-making process. Some of the most successful trucking companies today are run by women. Some of the most successful businesses are run by women. And the reason is very simple. In a man's environment, particularly in trucking, they have something additional to prove. They also have something that some of us don't have, and that's empathy. So the point I'm trying to make is look at all of your children, recognize that there needs to be one leader, and then you start the path of how do you exit the business. Do you just give them the business and say, okay, here, I want you to send mom and dad a check every week or every month, and if the business doesn't make it, our whole retirement implodes? The answer is absolutely not. What you want to do is you want to, number one, establish a value for the business. Number two, each of the children have to have a certain amount of skin in the game. In other words, they have to have a certain amount of risk. If your children simply expect you to turn the business over to them and you simply receive a check and they have no financial risk in the business at all, then I would tell you should not be involved in transferring the business to your children. You have to recognize that things change, people change, environments change. Next week I'm going to talk about the actual process. I'm going to explain the process. Until next time, thank you for attending the podcast.